Hello and welcome to episode 65 of the Page One podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And it is a brand new season, as we say.
Season 7.
Yeah. I don't know what the qualifications are to make it a season and when we start and stop. but
we call the shots of the season.
But we're calling this season 7. So if this is your first podcast, thanks very much for joining us. At the Page One podcast, we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing process, how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we've got lots of great guests lined up for you this season. Some big names, some debut authors. We like to mix it up, and then authors, screenwriters, video game writers. We're trying to get as many kinds of writer on the podcast as possible. So do check out the back catalogue as well, because there's a lot of names there that you'll probably recognise and want to hear from. But we do have a debut author to kick off this season.
We do indeed, the debut episode for a debut author. Her name is Margaux DeRoux, and her first book is The Lost Diary of Venice. It's a romance novel set dual timelines between Renaissance day Italy and present day America, and it's about a struggling artist who finds hidden secret in the library.
Yeah,
it's a really interesting premise.
This diary, which in fact, as we chat to Margaux, she tells us that it was actually her discovery of a treatise on art from that period, set from Venice, that inspired her to write this book. So it's really interesting. She comes from, her family is, I think both her parents were artists and stuff, so she comes from that background and has brought a lot of that into the book. It's also very timely that we're releasing this episode now, because today, as we record this, the day before the release of the podcast, is the 1600th birthday of Venice.
Oh, I did not know that, Marco. You kept that quiet.
Yeah.
When's the party?
Exactly. Well, sadly, in Venice, there can't be a party because they're under lockdown, I think. But yeah, it's a big day for
that's very exciting.
My favourite city. So yeah,
and of course, Marco does have familiar links to the great city of Venice.
Yeah. So I mentioned that when we're chatting with Margaux as well. So it's a really interesting chat to hear, how she's brought that background, and also just about her journey into publishing and how she found her agent and things like that. So we'll get on with the podcast, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest as well.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop, so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy, and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
I saw that you grew up in a family of painters, so you've obviously come from a sort of creative background, but did you always want to be a writer? Was that always your goal?
So I was thinking about this question, and I did grow up in a really creative household. I think there was maybe the assumption that if I did something creative, it'd be painting. I don't know why, but it didn't really occur to me that being a writer was it seemed like a fantasy that happened to other people and not for yourself. Like, oh, other people get their books published, and it didn't really seem attainable. And I also think that when you grow up in a certain kind of household, part of you rebels a little bit. And so growing up in a really creative household, I rebelled by getting a really stable job, going into like business and
world's worst rebel, and that's you're doing completely wrong.
My parents were so disappointed. No, but kind of, sort of, I think they were. I think there was part of them that was like, oh, I wish you'd just be a little more, creative. And then this thing happened where, it became more challenging to not express myself, not write, not do something really creative than to stay in that lane. I listened to the podcast Big Magic. It's not on anymore. Elizabeth Gilbert, the writer Elizabeth Gilbert, did it a couple years ago, and she had Brene Brown on, and she said everyone's creative, and when unused creativity is not benign, right? Like if you're not accessing it and it's calling out, that's not a benign thing. It can feel painful. And I think I just sort of reached that point. But if you do have listeners who I think are aspiring writers or wanting to break into this. And so I really want to encourage them and say, I have zero creative writing background, zero. Not even a short story,
right.
And no MFA. And this is something I did in the mornings because I just felt called to do it. And so if there's someone out there with a story who, is feeling insecure and feeling like, oh, I don't have the credentials, I don't have, this can't be for me. Yes, it absolutely can. Keep going, keep doing it. And also it's also okay to fail. It's okay for it not to work out. I think the really important thing is to be doing it for the experience of it and the experience of expressing your own creativity. So
yeah,
it's a very long answer.
No, but it's a very good point to make as well. I mean, what was it that made you? Obviously, you had this feeling you needed to do it, but what was it that actually made you think, right, I'm going to start writing this story? Because presumably, was it what became the Lost Diary of Venice? Was that the story that you first started writing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was in grad school. I studied rhetoric, which was, I joke that all I wanted to do was just like wear a black turtleneck and drink wine and talk about theory. But I came across the actual treatise that's in the book. The book is a dual timeline, and in the historical timeline, it follows an artist who's going blind, who wrote a treatise on art. And that's an actual person, and that's an actual treatise. And I uncovered it, and it was fascinating. It was one of those documents that feel kind of magical, and I was like, oh my gosh, is there a spell involved in this or something? It had like these really mystical, drawings, and it just took hold, and it wouldn't leave me alone. The idea that this guy wanted to be in a story of some sort. And then the more I did research around the time period, the elements of the plot really fell into place. It was really as helped out so much by the actual history and the actual events that occurred. And so it did feel like it had a life of its own, and it did feel like it wanted to be shared. And I had the sensation that I, just needed to do the best I could with the limited tools that I had, like I was in service to the story. And so I was trying to, research how to write, how do I not mess this up? How do I not let this story down? And so that's kind of how it came to be.
And with a story like it, as you say, it's sort of got this dual timeline thing of the present time and is it 16th century Venice? Yeah. And it's got also in especially in that older timeline, you've got there's more than one plot going on. There's the sort of Ottoman War story as well. How did you manage to pull all those threads together and make it work? Did you sit down and are you someone that had to plan it out carefully, or how did that happen?
So I really enjoyed listening to your back episodes of your podcast, and I hear all the writers kind of saying like, are they planners or pantsers?
Yeah,
which
exactly.
I didn't know those terms. And so I think I would probably definitely fall in the planning realm, but I would fall into that because of my own self-doubt, right? Like I felt like, okay, I need to really understand how all these things fit together. And so initially I did try to plan it out. And again, though, I was really helped by the historical pieces naturally falling into place. But for me, having a structure allowed there's that saying, like, if you have boundaries, you can kind of be more creative within them. Mm-hmm. And that's how it felt to me, is if I had these guardrails of, okay, this is the time period, and this is what needs to happen on this date and this month, and then I can be really creative within that framework. So that's what worked for me. And then again, if there are, folks listening who are writing, I found the story grid really helpful. I would recommend, read as much as you can about the craft of writing, and listen to podcasts like this, and
that's the best piece of advice.
Yes. this podcast. Subscribe and tell your friends.
Exactly.
But I personally have been loving listening to the podcast because, I feel like I'm very much still in the student seat. But the story grid is a resource. I have no affiliation with it. I just found it helpful, and it's all about how to structure a novel. Because and again, this goes back to that idea that, if you can break the rules after you know them. And yeah. I feel like I really needed to, get something really solid and get something that quote unquote worked before I tried to do anything experimental in any capacity. So
yeah. And when you're writing a story like this, which is set in kind of in the past with real people and real things that happened, how much truth do you have to include? What's the balance between being so close to the truth that you lose the fun of it all?
That's something I'm still kind of struggling with, because I'm working on another piece that is also historical, and for me, it's a feeling of wanting to honor those actual people. They really existed. They really had opinions and feelings and lives. And for me, the way that I can strike the balance is trying to feel, would they be really upset if I did this to them? Or would they be okay? And that's an impossible thing to answer, but it's what's top of mind for me when I'm writing is, am I still capturing this person's goal? And for Giovanni in this book, his goal was to really share his theories on art. And so I felt okay giving him a little bit more of a colorful life, because the character is still very focused on his theories and on leaving something behind in the world. But that's a really tricky balance. I don't know if there's ever a perfect answer to it.
It's interesting just as a thing, because with history that far back, you maybe have more scope to tell your own story about it and weave in and out of actual events and stuff, because there's been the recent, I don't know if it's reached America, but certainly over here there's been some controversy about The Crown on Netflix, and what it portrays, and people thinking, is it true, is it not true, and how it's portrayed Princess Diana and all this sort of stuff. And even the government's getting involved in saying there should be something at the start saying
there's nothing else really happening at the moment over here.
No, exactly. It's the important topic of the day, clearly.
I'm watching, but I'm not caught up.
Right.
Okay,
Well, I'm not going to spoil it,
spoilers.
but I'm just saying that, do you think when you're writing historical fiction, the further back it is, the more you do have that scope to tell your own story, as opposed to the closer you come in time to the present time, especially, in the case of The Crown, there's still people that are alive. So there's libel laws and stuff as well, potentially involved there. But, when you're going back that far back, is it easier to almost say, right, I'm going to cherry pick these things and put them together into a story? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you have more distance. You have, like you say, no one's gonna get upset at you.
Yeah.
There's also the challenge though, because you're looking at it from your perspective and projecting your values onto a completely different time period. And so it is easier. I think, for me, I think I found what was most interesting was seeing how many things hadn't changed. And the same struggles, you have the struggles between religion. You have, this book brings up the first ghetto, which was in Venice, and the Jewish population had to wear stars in Venice. This is years and years and years before the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And the extreme anti-Semitism. And then, as I was writing this, we were in the U.S. having, attacks on synagogues. And so from a creative standpoint, yes, there is so much distance that things feel flexible. Things feel definitely much more flexible. And you do feel more free to maybe rearrange, and at the same time you're kind of blown away by the themes that just
keep coming up. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And Venice is an interesting one as well, simply because did you go to Venice to research the novel at all?
Oh man, I wish. I had gone to Venice before. I have some friends that moved to a city right outside Venice, and they were very nice and let me stay on their couch a couple of times when I was in my searching 20s, and then being a little bit of a vagabond, and I loved it. But when I was writing this, I was in a stressful job, and I didn't know, like, is this going to work? I should have just quit everything. And looking back, I should have quit everything and moved to Venice, but you just don't know. And so,
I mean, what I was going to say about Venice was it's I mean, I'm biased because my mum's family is from there, so I love the city, but it's a very unique place in the sense that it's not difficult to imagine what life was like. It's changed so little, apart from if you take out all the tourists and stuff in the tourist shops. But you can imagine what life was like. You can see where these politicians met. You can go through the Doge's palace. You can, it's very easy to put yourself in those shoes, I think.
Yeah, and I think so. I grew up in Alaska, where there's nothing too old there. It'll rot out because the climate is so extreme, and there's just not a lot of people. And so I remember the first time I traveled to Europe and realized, oh my gosh, these are the actual buildings that these people were in. These are actual hallways, and it made such an impression on me. And Venice in particular, I think there's just something magical about that place. It was such a hub of creativity and artistry. And I think that seeped into the buildings and the city, there's that, you still feel that aliveness, even though, it's overrun by tourists now. And
but yeah, you can still imagine when you're walking down the narrow little streets at night and stuff, you could be transported back very easily. I mean, there are other cities, Edinburgh actually is parts of Edinburgh like that as well, but it is a lot of it's like a film set almost, it takes you there.
Yeah, it invites, and that's probably why there's quite a few novels set in Venice that just like invites the imagination. It's really such a special place.
And when you're writing a book like that, which does have these dual parts, how do you work out how much do you put in each part? How do you know how much time to spend in the past and the present and balance of that? And is that something you just kind of do? Do you write one side completely and then do the other, or do you jump between the two voices as you go type thing?
So for me, I wanted to have kind of to feel pretty equally balanced. So I knew, I'm going to alternate chapter versus chapter. And then I did write it all the way through. So switching in a way that was nice for me as a writer, because it kind of gave me breathing room from the other narrative. But then when I was editing it, I would go one section at a time to make sure there's really continuity between each narrative. And I got really good advice from, I participated in a little writer's workshop, which I really recommend for writers too. I just went to a free writer's workshop in my community that had whoever came in that day who was coming in that day. All kind of shared little bits of what we'd written. And the man, leading the group gave me really good advice, saying your historical piece has to influence and affect and change somehow the modern. Like there has to be interplay between the two. What happens in the historical has to alter the direction of the modern. I hadn't created the enough interconnectivity. And so if there's somebody out there who's working on a piece like that, would be one of my big piece of advice, is really make sure that there's influence, that it matters to the modern piece, that the historical piece is present there. And does your book is set in Nebraska, right?
Yeah, but and I don't know why I did set it in Nebraska. I think I wanted a kind of small town America type feel to it. And it does go back and forth between two different points of view as well. And I kind of, like you, when I wrote it, I kind of went back and forth. But and I think that it's a good point about wanting a break from what you write. It's quite nice to have that jumping around as you're doing it. But then as you go back to edit it, it is easier just keeping to the one side, I think.
Yeah, it's tricky, kind of a little bit of both, column A and column B.
Yeah, and I suppose it's interesting that from what you say, when you started off, you said you kind of wanted that equal balance from the get-go. So did that influence what the story was, or how much, or did it naturally fall into the way you wanted, or did you have to cut things or add things in to make it more equal?
I initially had my chapters way too long. they were just very sizable chapters. And I gave the piece to a friend who is an editor and who does not like historical fiction or romance. Not to say doesn't like them, but that's not their, what they normally would gravitate towards, which I think is really good. I think it's really good to share your draft with someone who is maybe not necessarily your target audience, because they can give really, they have a good perspective, I think. And her advice was, you got to cut these chapters, make them shorter. And make sure that there's something at the end that is going to provoke the reader to like, I need to keep reading to figure out what happens next. For me, I'm definitely not somebody who's doing art for art's sake. It's really important to me that the book is satisfying to a reader. When I was, in my job and I was having a hard time, just, you're in something that maybe isn't your passion, and the days can start feeling a little bit like a slog. And I would get on the subway system here, and books helped me get to work. I would escape into a book, and that was honestly what helped me get through the days sometimes. And so my whole goal has been, can I make something that can do that for somebody else, that can give them that escape that they really need, and really help them get through the day. That's my ultimate goal. And so I was really focused on trying to make it as compelling as possible, and structurally as satisfying as I could make it. And it turned out, and so creating those sense of anticipation, and making it not too big of a chunk of chapter to get through at a time.
And you were writing this, as you said, I think, were you working in marketing at the time you were writing this?
Yeah, I was a strategist, which I was in tech here, and I was working with, Silicon Valley companies. And so it was a lot of data. So I did a bunch of stuff on the data side, and very, very analytical, very kind of cold, I would say. And man, my soul was calling out for the humanities. I was like, and I mean, I'm really grateful for that experience. I still do some consulting for tech companies. It makes me feel plugged into what's actually happening in the world in terms of technology and, where we're heading. And I like having that kind of finger on the pulse of that. But it wasn't feeding my soul.
But how did you, because it is a situation that lots of people are in, including us. How did you manage to fit the writing in around that day job as well?
So I was waking up at 5, and writing before work, and again, kind of looping back to that idea of it was more painful to not do it. And so I just felt like I have to do this. I have to at least try. And so I had just reached that litmus point, and so I was going to do anything it took to see if it would work, because if it didn't work and I needed to do something else, I needed to know, I have to, something has to change. So for me personally, I don't recommend other people wait until they reach that point. Now,
And then once you'd written the book and you'd done your 5 a.m. starts and edited it and stuff, what was your next step then in terms of actually trying to get to the publication of the book? What was your path?
Well, I fortunately had a spouse who kind of was like, enough already. you have to put it out there and just see, because without that, I probably would have just kept tinkering and forever. Although it's interesting, went through this with my father and his paintings. He'd always talk to me about when the painting was done, and that if you keep working on it, you can actually make it, you can hurt the painting, and you can overwork it. But I think I probably would have gone down that path. And so I did have someone kind of push me and say, listen, it's in enough of a format where you can get a sense, you can put it out there and get a sense, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? And so I know that you've had a lot of writers on here say, okay, Publishers Marketplace, and, get Publishers Marketplace, and either Query Tracker, I think, is also a really good one. I spent a lot of time on the query letter, and thank God for the internet, because you can find really good examples of your query letter online. And there's a bunch of services that do critiques for query letters. And so take advantage of all of that. But I can't stress enough that I think, you've completed the book. You're so relieved you did it. And then you have to face the challenge of spending all this time on a query letter. And it's, like the last thing you probably want to do as a writer is obsess over this one page. But you just, I did so many versions of the query letter. And so I recommend really investing in that. And then,
did you send out different versions to different agents, or, how? Yeah. So I ended up getting the first agent I reached out to, but I didn't know that. Like it took a while. It took a while to hear back, and so I had queried a few others in the interim and kind of tweaked the letter. And I was really trying to, okay, maybe this will work, and also really doing due diligence on what is this person really interested in, what can I compare it to that's in their portfolio, and I really recommend manuscript wish list on Twitter, that hashtag. Okay. Because that's how I found my agent. I went through it's hashtag. I don't want to mess it. I'm assuming MSWL, but double check that. Okay. Double check that. But it's the hashtag for manuscript wish list. And she had written, hey, I'm looking for something like this and this, and those were two pieces that were comparable. I felt they were comparable to what I'd written. And so it gave me that immediate in. I could send in the query, hey, I just saw on Twitter that you're looking for something similar to these pieces. I think I've got that for you. And nice. It's that hashtag is so nice because you can, it's of the moment too. You can know, oh, this person is right now looking for some, so really helpful. And I'm new to Twitter, and it's really hard not to doom scroll. Yes. Also, if you can have any kind of like self-control with Twitter, it is a really good repository for like tips. You can look up, what folks share a lot of information on there, but it's hard not to get lost in just political chaos landmines. Yes. But
yeah, I'm hoping it'll be quieter next year.
Oh my gosh.
But, and what was it like trying to launch a book in this year? Because I think there was, I can't remember how many it was, but there was a day in September when so many books launched on the same day because they'd been pushed back and back in the launches, and it seems like a totally hectic time. You got that as well as the fact that a lot of stores are shut, etc. So what was it like launching a book during all that? Was it? Oh, I'm assuming it was quite hard.
Yeah, so we decided not to push because of that reason. Because it would just get, a debut novel, you're just going to get totally lost. Yeah. So we kept the summer, summer launch, but the summer was like, social chaos in the United States. It was the pandemic plus the protests, right? Yeah. And plus just, you had so much happening. And so it was a moment where I honestly felt like, this is just how the chips fell. And I didn't feel even comfortable trying to promote the book during all of that because it felt like there were these issues that were, of such urgency and such importance. I felt, it felt too tone deaf in a way to say, hey, I just wrote a book, like, I know that you're working with like, systemic inequality, but look at this book I made. So it was really challenging, and that's okay. It's not, it's okay. And in a way, I was grateful that it was my first book, because I didn't have anything to compare it to. I couldn't say like, oh, I used to be able to do all these events and, have this glamorous launches and stuff. And now I have nothing to compare it to. So I don't know what I'm missing out on. So it's, but the paperback's coming out soon, and the paperback's already out in the UK, and it's coming out in the US. And so I'm hoping, that I think I'll feel a lot more comfortable promoting it now. So nothing's ever perfect. I'm just grateful that I was able to write a book. I'm really grateful that I was able to have this experience, and I had an editor who taught me so much, and the ability to like work on something that I felt so passionate about, and to feel creatively alive, and creatively expressing myself. And for me, I've already, that's it for me. That's so much joy. And so I didn't really, it'd be nice to have a normal publication, but it wasn't what I was in it for,
Yeah. And when you got your agent, and then did it take long to find a publisher, or was that quite a quick process?
It was pretty quick. I think I'm in a historical fiction / romance kind of equal parts. And I'm a hopeless romantic. So that's just like, what I'm drawn to. And fortunately that's a fairly marketable genre. And I think my agent maybe already had a relationship with the editor and knew this might be a good fit for this person. And so I'm really, really grateful for that, that she was able to have those relationships and know where the right home would be. And man, I feel like I lucked out, because my editor, in terms of being such a mentor, she's been a phenomenal mentor.
And in terms of that, did you, was it an easy process? It sounds like it was, given the relationship, but was it an easy process to going back and forth with the editor? Presumably she came back with some notes or edits to suggest and things like that, but that was a good experience from your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. But for me, I really think that the creative work has its own essence. It's not an extension of me or my ego. It's it is its own it's its own being that wants to be shared with the world and come out into the world. And so it was always around what will make this better, what will make this closer to what it wants to be. How do we get closer? You get closer and closer to the thing that it wants to be. And so I think that's I would recommend that mentality, because it really allows you to kind of say, these are great edits, or, and if you push back, you're not pushing back because you're personally so attached to that, paragraph or that character. You're pushing back because you feel like they really need to be there for a certain reason.
And I suppose anything that gets cut out of it in that process, it's not like it's gone. You've still got it. You could use it in another book. There could be a spark or something that goes out elsewhere. So it's not gone for good. So it is something quite a healthy attitude to take to, I think.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of writers saying, they maybe like cut a character that didn't fit, but that they love that character so much, and then that sparked the next project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, there's always and it's this idea of like listening to the work and paying attention what really has that spark in it, and where is it going to lead you. It's such, it's this joyful adventure, right? Creativity.
I think that's when you know it's working, is when the story is, you're sort of taken along by the story rather than you taking the story along, almost, sort of a thing.
Perfect. That's exactly, you're putting it perfectly. It's, yeah.
And for your, you said you're working on another historical work just now. Is that something, because this one came about because you had discovered this treatise previously. Is this something that you'd also uncovered earlier, or is it something that you've actually gone looking for and found separately?
So this is a really interesting question. And I think, the other thing I've heard writers say is that there's this process of self-discovery in the writing. Like, you learn about yourself. I don't know if you feel that too, but as you're writing, you're learning about yourself. You can't totally not be in your pages and in your work, for better or worse. Yeah. And so what I learned in this process was that it felt like a coming home to write about art, because I grew up in that artistic household. It's so embedded in who I am, and having this link between creative writing and art just felt really, really right. And that was just a totally unexpected discovery for me. And so this next book is similar. It's dealing with, and TBD, we'll see if my editor likes it. We'll see if it works out, like fingers and toes are still crossed. But I did, have that realization that I really love writing about art and artists and creating these stories around these artistic movements and time periods. And I love research. I love it. And it's fascinating to me to try to go back and recreate a historical time period. And I, selfishly, it's like I personally learned so much, and it's so fun.
When you're doing research like that, is it difficult, because you're trying to build, you're trying to build a world almost for the reader to go back to, and you're building that with the research that you've got. But is it difficult to know how much of that research to actually put on the page and how much to sort of just hint at with the general story?
It's like the tiniest fraction ends up on the page, but you have to do all of it to be able to place yourself there, and so I think you have to have sort of like a Buddhist Zen detachment when you do historical fiction, because all those hours of research, and then like this tiny little sliver ends up on the page, and you just have to it's just this process of letting go and letting go and letting go. But I think anyone who writes historical fiction there has to be some part of that person that loves the nerding out. And for me, the research was my comfort zone. I didn't have the creative writing background. I had a lot of insecurity around there, but the research, I felt very confident in. I was like, okay, I know how to do this. There's right and wrong, something is a fact or it's not a fact, and I can, track that down. And so that there's a certainty to the research that made it a little bit of a comfort zone. So
I remember reading the Cicero books by Robert Harris, and they're set in ancient Rome, and obviously they're excellent books and they're very exciting, blah blah. But part of the enjoyment for it is what you learn from it. You're learning about ancient Rome and all the backstabbing, and it's all real people, and it's almost like sneakily learning it. Like, it's not like reading a textbook. It's just it's a really nice way to learn about I mean, I'm assuming it's all completely accurate as well. But yeah, so it's, I think, like a well done, and it is, you're totally right, like, yes, tiny sliver ends up on the page compared to what actually was done. But I think if it is done well, yeah, part of the joy of reading those books is learning about the time period, etc., which is something I probably wouldn't have read about otherwise, if it wasn't in that kind of fiction genre almost.
The sugar on the medicine.
Yeah,
it's exactly what it is. Exactly.
And I think that's what's so powerful about historical fiction. And I think I'm just in love with that genre, but it does force you to think, okay, what historically has happened that is still exerting influence. That book is talking about structures that still exert an influence in the way our society is ordered, right? Yeah. The way that we think, even. And so it has such power to really peel back the mechanisms underneath our current life and what we might take for granted or think has always been. Yeah. You can sort of see its genesis, or see actually it hasn't always been that way, and maybe there are other ways of thinking about the world or relating to people. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It is always amazing, I think, in those books, the ancient Rome book, when you kind of realize, as you say, how much really hasn't changed, or how advanced they were in some ways in terms of legal system, etc. And then at the same time they're throwing their bodies of their enemies over the wall and then going for dinner. And so it's this crazy mashup, and half of it seems so removed from modern life. The other half seems just as advanced in terms of legal thinking, etc. So it's a really fascinating genre to write in, I think.
Oh yeah, and I mean I love writing in it, and I love reading. So
has it been easier writing your second book as a second book, or with having more time to write it and going back at it again, or is it harder to try and recapture that kind of chaotic magic?
So I had a baby in the interim. So the first time that I was writing, 5 a.m. with this, stressful job. And I was just trying to get, little snatches of time. And then I had a baby. And I'm still trying just to get snatches. Yeah. No, I thought I was supposed to have all this, luxurious expanse of writerly, allowance. And so I had to kind of take a break. This was my first baby, and pandemic child, and so we're not doing childcare. I didn't really feel comfortable with that. Currently, in our particular situation, everyone is navigating it differently, and so I totally honor everyone's journey. But for us, we had the ability for me to stay home, and so I did. And I didn't find the time. I really struggled to find the time, especially when she was really little. She hasn't been a great sleeper. So I think right now I'm again reaching that point of painfulness. Like I haven't, I have been pushing to find time, and I do feel like right now is this point of it's painful to not be working. She's sleeping better. I can find more time now. And the idea that was in my head, I've just this week had a little, another flash of insight around it. I'm feeling really excited about it. So right now, it does feel like a lot of those elements are coming back together for me. So I have excitement around it. And your episode with, Peng Shepherd, is that? Yeah, right? Am I saying, I feel like I'm always butchering people's names.
I hope that's how you say it. That's how we say it.
Yeah, exactly.
I loved that episode you did, because, they're talking about the need for that breathing room and how that is important. And as much as you wish you could just nose to the grindstone, get it out, that having those breaks actually is really important to the whole process. And I found that too. Having this kind of forced break has really refueled.
Yeah, you're letting that feeling build up again where you then have to go and do it, I suppose. Whereas I think if you forced yourself to do it, it would become like that job that you start to dislike because it's something that you're having to do every single day, all the time. And it becomes harder in its own way that way, I think, maybe.
Oh, it's such a balance. It's so tough because then you have all these writers saying, no, you need to show up every day.
Yeah, no, it's true.
I know.
And so it's like, I think it is kind of, I think it is just, a little bit of a mix of the two.
I mean, I definitely think that's true, that there is a habit thing to it to make you write, especially if you've not been doing it for a while, to then start get back into it again. But I do agree with what you're saying and what Peng said, which was that having these breaks is good for your creativity, just to let things sit, and even if you don't think you're thinking about them, they sort of work their way through your head until you're suddenly like, okay, now I know where that's going, kind of a thing. Yeah,
we were chatting to someone in season 1 who said, I can't remember who it was now, who said very similar, and he said basically sometimes you need to be on the sofa eating crisps or whatever, and it looks like you're not doing anything, but you are working on stuff, and it will pop out. But it's a balance. It's hard, and everyone's different, and you can't have a one rule fits all. But although Twitter would let you believe there's simple,
there's always a right and wrong, Derek, on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of like going to sleep, going to sleep with a problem, and then waking up and being like, oh, I didn't even think of that, and I would always.
In the moment you're just so stressed about it all.
Yeah, I'd always go to sleep with my textbook underneath my pillow when I was cramming for tests. Read everything right before bed. And the subconscious is always working. It's always working. So, and then plus, as a writer, you get that really good excuse, of zoning out and just say, actually, I'm working.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All processing. This is really
do my best
important.
thinking in the pub. And it's
exactly.
Important. Yeah.
Something on Twitter will tell me what's right next.
I have to see how the crown ends.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So you're working on that is obviously what is next in the pipeline. Is it something that is that a book that you've got a deal for already, or is it something you're just going to take to your editor? Yeah,
I'm going to see if she likes it. I told her the idea. She likes the idea, and so it's just is what I write. Does she feel and a lot of it, it's a business, right? And you have to, it's so tough. I am always interested in this relationship between art and patrons, right? Artists throughout history have always relied on patrons, and and you have to think, will this satisfy people? Will this, and then the tensions between that are really fascinating to me. And so for her, it's going to be, will this be something that, the folks that like this first book, are they going to like, will they like this idea? Will they be excited to pick it up and then start to know what they can expect from you as a writer? At the same time, I know that there's a lot of writers who have totally switched genres and done really different things. And so it's possible.
It's possible, but from speaking to people, it seems to be a lot more difficult to do that. Certainly because of that, it's an easier sell for your agent and your publisher to say, you like this book, so buy this book, kind of thing, than if you completely switch things up. What is the last film that you saw?
I fortunately have listened to the podcast, so I knew. And I was
like, watch some highbrow films now to make a good answer for this question.
It was more just like, when is the last time I was able to sit and watch a movie? But I realized I did watch the Happiest season, which was released on Hulu, I think. And it's adorable. It's just it's a holiday movie, coming home for the holidays, and the main character is trying to come out to her family. But it has all of the kind of holiday season tropes and shenanigans, and it was really pretty warm and fuzzy, and I'm a sucker for that. So
I do think that when it comes to Christmas movies, I definitely give films a lot more leeway. If they're on the cusp of being a bit crappy, whatever. If they're kind of got good cheer and Christmas spirit, then that goes a long way, I think, to be fair.
Yeah. But I mean, this was actually really, really, I think it was really smartly done. And
nice. I've heard of that.
It's fresh, yeah.
And what was the last book you read?
Okay, so well, I already know that there are strong opinions about paper versus ebook.
Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
It's very, very important. Make a break it for me here.
I'm adding something else to the mix, which is audiobooks.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yep.
I have my time. I mean, I'm just like, where is my time going? And there's endless dishes, endless laundry, but I can listen to a book while I do it. So as a new mom, I'm championing the audiobook. And so the one I just listened to was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which is, a big bestseller. And that was really fun. And I have to say, obviously the author deserves a ton of credit, but the narrator had to do all of these accents, had a main character who lost her accent gradually over the course of the book. So I am just like, kudos. I feel like I need to find her name really quick.
It does make a massive difference in audiobooks, like the narrator, to your enjoyment of the book. It can be, there are some that are just brilliant, and then some that are pretty dull, and you lose interest in the book.
Julia Whelan.
Excellent.
Awesome. I feel like I just need to say her name out loud, which I know is a theme in the book. So I have to say her name out loud because that was, I feel like that's kind of a little bit of a unsung role.
No, it is definitely, but it does make a big difference, as we say. And what was the last TV series that you watched or are watching?
Well, I am catching up on The Crown.
Right.
Nice.
So that's been our theme throughout this conversation. And I'm also a huge fan of The Great British Bake Off. And so,
nice.
That the season just came out. The latest season just came out here in the U.S. So I'm a huge sucker for that. The Paul Hollywood handshake. So
have they had the episode where they make cakes out of? Is it like celebrity cakes or something? I think that's in this season, the newest season. That's a good one.
Oh yes. And they're always doing, really intense chocolate work on like the hottest day.
Yeah, exactly.
And I had no idea it'd be so hot. And you're like, it is this hot every season of you knew what they're doing. So I get very invested. I get so invested in who's doing well and who I think is going to win. So we have a fun time with that. It's also, with a kid around, I'm limited. I don't want a lot of violence or anything. So that's a really safe one. But
excellent.
I still have to watch all my thriller. I have so much to catch up on. So I have a huge list.
Yep.
Yeah. So the very last thing we do, as you'll know, is a quick fire either or, and there's no right or wrong answers apart from one. So the first one is Girl with a Pearl Earring or The Clockbaker's Daughter.
Oh, I have to say Girl with the Pearl Earring, just because of, where I was when I read it. And, I've such a personal attachment to that book. It brings back a time in my life. So
Nice.
Yeah.
TV or cinema?
Cinema.
One day.
Yeah.
One day we'll be able to go back to them.
Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Fancy restaurant, you get to dress up, you get to put some perfume on, you get the anticipation, the whole drive to the restaurant, you get to think about what you're going to eat. appetizers.
Yeah.
You get the appetizers. I'm making my case here. So.
No, I'm sold. That's fine.
A fancy restaurant, especially if someone
hungry.
else is paying, then I really like a fancy restaurant. Yeah.
I feel. Order anything you like.
Yeah.
Champagne.
And here it is, real book or ebook?
There's no right answer to this one. I know that ebook is
that sounds like a cop out to me.
Okay. Well, it's hard because the paper you get the feeling, all of the tactile sensations. You cannot. There's no replacement for that. Ebook, you don't have to be shamed by looking at your huge pile of to be read.
That is true.
You can just buy them and have them waiting for you, and not have to look at them on the shelf, mocking you for not getting to them. So.
Yeah, I find myself like buying books on the Kindle that then months later I'm like, oh, I forgot I actually bought that. It's sitting there in the library.
Yeah,
but
it's very easy to build up a very big library.
Yeah.
You completely lose track of very quickly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so good. Well, that was a really good episode and a really interesting way of getting into the industry. That whole hashtag Twitter, jumping in there. It's something that I've never. It's good to chat to someone who's made success of it because you see them quite a lot on Twitter, and I've always wondered. Do a lot of people find success in that? And it's nice to find someone who has. Yeah,
no, that's right. And we'll put a link to that hashtag on Twitter, MSWL, I think it is. Just so if you are trying to find an agent, it's a quick way of doing it. And it's a good idea because it's agents literally saying, this is what I'm looking for just now. So if you've written a story like that, then it's the perfect, you're probably going to jump
exactly.
straight to the top of the pile.
Exactly. And I also really enjoyed when she was saying about having to work in a book with a timeline set both in the past and the present, and revising one whole part of the book first and then going back and doing the other. Do you jump back and forth between the two? And it's interesting because folk, I think, who are writing books with two separate storylines, that's what I've always wondered about. Do you focus on one whole plot line and then do the other, or do you jump back and forth? And
it's
separate.
I mean, I thought she made good points on both. When you're writing it, it's good to sort of jump between the two because it kind of refreshes you and gives you impetus and not get bored with the timeline that you're in. But at the same time, when you're revising it, it makes absolute sense to revise the same timeline because you can. It'll be easier to spot any inconsistencies at that point.
You can keep that voice continuous. You can see if there's anything you've missed out, and I think as you're reading it, it's always nice to have that kind of story because you do, as you say, even as you're writing it, as you're reading it as well, it's not boring. You're jumping back and forth. There's always new stuff happening. Yeah, very cool.
So thanks very much to Margaux for coming on to the podcast and taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciated that. And The Lost Diary of Venice is out now. We've put a link to bookshop.org in the podcast description, so do grab that if it takes your fancy. And we've got another great guest next week.
Next week we're chatting with Annalee Newitz, who is a really fantastic author, writer, journalist, editor. They've done a kind of whole mix of stuff. Popular Science and Wired, but perhaps in the journalist front, most well known for IO9.
Yeah, founding editor.
Founding editor, yeah. Really fun blog, which kind of combined popular science and science fiction stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going on today. I think it's now part of the Gizmodo network.
I think that's right, yeah.
But it was sort of, it came about at the perfect time, didn't it? Because it came about at the time that these superhero movies and Big Bang Theory and all that sort of nerd culture was suddenly taken over, and it was the perfect place to find it, along with your more serious science articles as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a really nice mixture of the two, I think.
And it's a really great chat we have with Annalee. They've written novels, and their latest book is a non-fiction book. So we hear about the differences in writing fiction and non-fiction, and bringing that sort of more journalistic approach to the non-fiction work. So, really great episode. So please do come back for that one next week. If you did enjoy this episode, if you were able to take 2 seconds to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever app you're on.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.